So here we are with the beginning of the evaluations for Moooc Term 1, Assignment 6, which is string trio scoring. Now, over here on the left side, we have the ongoing approaches, which are sort of starting to stack up from previous lessons, 2 to 3 minutes total, using lyricism and craft, avoid overusing any one technique, like double stops, compose in your own artistic voice. And so these are all just have been going on for pretty much the whole lesson. Now, this is starting to build up from different previous lessons, in the past 2 or 3 previous lessons. Progress approaches of tone production, like, pizzicato, sol si, tremolo, and so on. Phrasing, register, and instrumental alliances. All right, so, that is because especially instrumental alliances in our first all-string ensemble piece, right? Now, developing approaches, close and open voices, assigning leading roles in apt registers, right? So, just making sure that whatever gets the leading role is in a strong place compared to the other 2 instruments. Support with intelligent accompaniment styles, right? Accompaniment styles like, like Alberti bass or pizzicato or whatever, strumming cello chords. Alliances as ongoing, just like as we have studied in this particular lesson. Voice crossings, where say the cello plays higher than the viola, or the cello plays higher than the viola and the violin at times, or the viola plays higher than the violin, or actually, the leading instrument could technically be the violin playing lower than both the cello and the viola if the cello and viola parts are high. So voice crossings. Apply above as fits the music, not arbitrarily, like, don't just do it to do it, but do it because it fits your musical idea. So I'm just going to say this once, this particular guide, this particular review of what we are doing, and I'll just mention it at the beginning of the next video. I'd say everybody who was in the dotted brev level is really just now part of an overall evaluation group. I'm not going to separate out scores based on, levels of contribution or where you were at, because, at this point it doesn't really matter. Everybody stuck with it and supported the course and was really great about it. So I'm just going to keep right on rolling along with everybody in one big batch, and evaluating in alphabetical order, because it's just easier for me to keep things organized on this end. So anyways, as you'll see coming up, people did great work, and whether enough of these approaches were followed or not for me to give the right kind of feedback, it was still just really a great batch of scores from everybody. And I would recommend, if people are coming new to this, like they are, say you are a new Patreon supporter and you want to really absorb it, watch all of the evaluations, and everybody should watch all the evaluations. I mean, seriously, you guys. I've been releasing some of these videos. I've been emailing the participants, and I've been seeing like 0 views on some videos, or just like 1 or 2. And what that tells me is that really people are not watching all the evaluations for all the scores. And I think that you guys really should, okay? Because there are a lot of things, there's only so much I can say in the time that I've got for each score. And I might mention something that is also a problem in your score, in somebody else's evaluation, right? So do not miss the chance to improve yourself, right? Really watch all the materials for all of the evaluations and all of the readings. But anyways, also watch the readings for this, because they were extraordinary, really, really great commitment from the players. And with that, let's look at the evaluations for the string trio scores. So, our very first piece that we're going to start off with, since this is all going to be alphabetical order, rather than the order that I put things in the evaluations readings. Sorry, in the musician readings of these scores. So Matthias's score dodges a lot of what the of what the assignment was about. Okay, so it's basically just a fugue. So I mean, there are some voice crossings, and that is really cool. And in particular, the cello being above the viola during its entrance, and the viola being above the violin in places, and it was really cool that you started with the viola at the beginning with the middle voice as stating the opening. So I like that a lot, but it gives me very little to evaluate along the lines of the lesson. So as a piece of string writing, it works great in the same way that Bach's works apply themselves to many kinds of instruments. I mean, this could have been played really well on, say, like lutes, right? Or it could have been played really well on, say, on brass or something like that, or on an organ, just reduced as a keyboard piece. So yeah, I mean, it's a great little piece of music. It's a great idea of music, and I don't really, I don't get into analysis of counterpoint or of harmony. I mean, I'm sure that there are a few things that you could tighten up or adjust in terms of, if you really wanted this to abide by the same rules that Bach was following. There are a couple of spots that I noticed. But it's all good. It's all fine. So I mean, but I can't comment on like lyrical phrasing. I can't, there are some things where where obviously the voices are meant to relate to one another. And I would say if you really had intended something like this with the voices to dovetail into each other, like this is what this seems to be right in here, and then you should have them meet on the same note, right? Just have B flat and B flat, right? Have this part end with a B flat, or have this cello part start with the C sharp a beat before, if that was the intention. And you so far you did the voice crossings in a really effective way, that where the voice that was crossing was not at a disadvantage. Okay, and logically, the voice crossings led from one to the other, so that was good. And just in terms of pure scoring, I'm not so sure that this gap was completely natural, although it didn't sound too bad when it was performed with real instruments. So yeah, that I just really did feel the dropout, when I was reading it through in my head, and and obviously you can hear that with the MIDI mock-up. There is one thing that could possibly be mentioned here, and that is just the closeness. I mean, I was mentioning closeness in the assignment in terms of, more the placement of harmonic elements or close spacing and wide spacing in terms of the functions. And I would say that there is a lot of close spacing in this. And, what's more is a really dark sound because just, for the most part, everything is really being played on the lowest strings of the instrument. I'd say like about 60 to 70% of the time, the lines, if you were to add up overall, what are the strings that are used the most often? Probably the third and fourth strings with most of these instruments. So you get just a really, and that actually lends a bit of confusion to the clarity of the functions of your fugue. That would be a possible thing that you might want to work on, is just spreading this a little bit wider. I mean, part of it is just the construction of the fugue theme itself. Do you know what I mean? Just the way that it's placed and the way that it follows. It has a tendency to sort of crowd, and become very, very close to begin with. And I mean, there are a lot of fugues that are like that, but they're actually perhaps a little bit more clear when you play it on like a harpsichord or or an organ or something like that. But even there, it can get to be a little bunched up. Yeah, but I would say like that might be something to work on if you just want to take this kind of fugal writing further. Is try to just try to have higher voices. Maybe in viola and violin to sort of spread out the sound a bit. Yeah, so I mean, it's a really effective piece of music. What else can I say? But I just really would have wanted, just for my own purposes as a mentor, to be able to dig into it a bit more. You know what I mean? Just like to really go over some of the things that we talked about in terms of scoring. Because if those values, if those ideas get put off for too long, then that takes away from the overall thrust of what's going on. But look, this is a remarkable piece of music. It's great, and I'm glad that you submitted it. But I just I wanted something that had a little bit more construction that I could evaluate along the as part of the series, part of the course, I should say. So, anyways, look, brilliant. Great, if everybody is just, if there are people coming to this and looking at this and, as like a first example of what you can do with the trio, I think it's fantastic. And, very similar to what Mozart did for what was the name of that count? There was a count who was a client of his when he first moved to Vienna, and the count was just really, really into Bach fugues, and he set Mozart the task of scoring some of the Bach well-tempered clavier fugues for string quartet. So this really reminds me of those works and Mozart did actually, I think, fairly periodistic, fairly faithful adaptations of those works. Ones that I think Bach would not have been too upset about if he had heard them himself. So yeah, this reminds me of that particular approach. So, anyways, great work, and on to the next piece. Our second score in this batch is Ron Brown's Variations on 6 Notes, and really it just is essentially 6 notes, just different motives built on those 6 notes, and just apportioned. I mean, 7 notes makes a scale or a mode, right? So it's essentially with one of those taken out, but with a very interesting tuning. So, I mean, conceptually, it's a very fun piece. But the whole question we have to answer here is, how much does this follow our scoring assignment? So, yeah, it's got some pizzicato in it. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of trying to add like Sol C or Sol G or Sol Ponticello, Sol Tosto, it doesn't really do that. That's okay. We don't have to worry about that too much. But there is some good work in the different registers, and like for instance, viola's middle register middle to low register. Violin, same thing for the violin, a little higher, and then cello, answering in its sort of middle tenor register. I mean, some of these things would just happen if you are, saying, okay, here's where the motive starts, and then when it's answered, it's an octave higher, and then it goes back to the same octave in cello. Would have been interesting to hear them kind of, to hear the contrast between the same registers, the same essential registers in different instruments. But I mean, when you are really limiting yourself to one little mode, then and a certain motivic approach, then you do with what you can with what you've got. Now, there definitely was some exploration of close and open voices. Some nice wide spacing here, and some nice close spacing there. And there were some voice crossings, like, you can see that here. I mean, there wasn't anything that was just, obscenely huge voice crossing, which is always kind of fun to really flout the rules. This is kind of nice here, but essentially, first you've got the cello inside the viola part, right? And you've got the viola crossing over the violin part. So, but then here, jumping down, violin is on top, right? And then it's in the middle. Cello is on top, and then it is in the middle, and so on. So, so there's some fun, there's some fun overlapping of parts here and there. And this is nice right in here. I thought this was cool because you've got your violin reaching up as the viola sort of tumbles down, right? And then the lines intersect here as the viola just sort of keeps pushing higher and the violin jumps below it. I mean, this is a really neat piece. It's very modernistic compared to the general drift of a lot of scores is towards a more tonal approach. And that's actually a good place to start. I feel that it's actually more difficult to write in a modernistic style in a satisfying way if you're just completely starting out. And I have absolutely no preference one way or another. I just love all styles of music, so I'm not boosting one or the other. But this is just a really good example. But yeah, so some good, I really love these chords. Just and I don't know if you noticed, but the players decided to just go straight, speaking of modernism, have a very modernistic approach to to these chords in terms of like playing them non-vibrato. I think that is something that we talked about, just that they had this just wonderfully edgy quality when they didn't have any vibrato on them. Really, really, very cool, very spooky. And this is actually some really good scoring in terms of that, kind of in a more cinematic, more more edgy, more suspenseful kind of music. Good leading roles in registers where they will stand out. There was almost no situation where whichever instrument was leading got swallowed up in the texture. Because they were, the parts and the lines were pretty well apportioned. Now, in terms of accompaniment styles and supporting it, you used motives to support rather than like an actual like figure. Do you know what I mean? Like figuration patterns and so on. So that one didn't really get explored in this, but that's all right. And in terms of alliances, those were kind of also hard to sort of parse because, very seldom did you have instruments working together to support the other instrument, right? It was all pretty much just lines. Like, if you had, you have the occasional, conspiracy, like right in here, but it very rarely are the instruments sort of working together to, like, I mean, here, you have some, you've got this octave thing going. And that is very cool, but it's not really an embedded alliance, there's something that really works together hand in hand. Not until we really get to the end where there's some pizzicato working beneath the lead instrument of the violin on top. And you did, when you did explore certain things from our lesson, you did do it in a very musical way. It just really was an outgrowth of your own inspiration, and that was great. So I'm very satisfied with this piece. I think it's good trio scoring, and it would have been interesting to hear this as like maybe the first of a group of studies that are done in a similar way. Do you know what I mean? It's like, variations on 6 notes, then you could have had 5 of a different kind of mode, and then maybe 8 of another, it just would have been, it's a really nice springboard for further kinds of explorations. And yeah, I mean, it would be neat to hear you take it somewhere. Now, just a comment, you probably will hear me fixing this and editing this in other scores, and that is that once we've established what our 3 staves are for the entire piece, we do not need any reminders from the left-hand margin, right? So these can all be selected and deleted. I don't know how you do it in Finale, but in Sibelius, it certainly is a very simple thing of selecting and deleting. Yeah, and then it's just a much cleaner looking page, and just everybody knows string trio. Same thing with string quartet scoring, is you don't really need the names of the instruments or any of these smaller chamber scores, so long as the layout of each system of staves is exactly the same throughout the entire piece, and you don't need any reminders to the left. Okay, so just really a fine score. I'm just so happy to look at this. I think all of these entries are very strong, and I think you got a really good reading from our players, and they were very indulgent with it, and they really took it seriously and gave it their best. I felt in the very limited time span, but it would be cool if you could work with a string trio, just a regular string trio, and develop this idea into maybe a set of pieces and get a performance, because it really is worth pursuing. All right. So thank you, Ron, and on to the next score. So that very dynamic piece is by Mike, and it's just really, it was extremely effective reading. I thought that the music was exactly, just dead on for the kind of symposium reading that we had planned. It was just really everything fit right into the pocket. It was, it was an effective. It was an effective performance by them. Just even just like having run through it once and then giving it a try. Everything laid really, really well on the instruments, and there were not everything in the piece follows the curriculum of the assignment, but enough of it really does, and I really do like the like certain features of it. So let's go over everything. From taking it from the beginning and going forwards. Now, I really do like these, this sort of call and response that goes across the different registers. And, they're pretty much, an octave apart in viola and cello is always using the same registers on both instruments. It's a bit of a compromise for the violin because it still is kind of at the top of the staff if you see the way that these are scored, so it's similar, because the violin has such a higher reach than the viola or the cello, at least in its common use. But yeah, both of these are going to be negotiated, using the D string, right? Because there's only one possible A, and that will actually be fingered on the D string. So these are both kind of D-string ideas, right? Whereas this is kind of, more of an A-string idea, similar, second string, but still, kind of a different color, not exactly parallel, but still, still very effective. And I really like the way that they interacted with each other. This is definitely, assigning leading roles to apt registers, assigning this conversation to the apt registers. And I really liked the way that everything was tuned in fourths for this. That's very, very effective. And for this close scoring, you get the best color right where everything is here. Like with the viola in its middle register, the violin in its lower register, and the cello in its sort of upper middle. So it had a very coherent sound, both in piano and in forte. You might have noticed that they had a tendency to play with an edge, right? Like play some piano registers a bit louder than you might have expected, almost mezzo forte. I think it's just because they really wanted to dig into this particular piece because of the energy of it. And then the same idea down a fifth. Right, and that worked pretty well, I thought, because it's good because it explores the more dark areas of each instrument. Now there really wasn't any string effect scoring. You didn't, whereas you easily could have. You could have asked for this to be like flautando or a bit soltasto. It was sort of played a bit soltasto. I think the violinist heard your, the kind of more dreamy aspect here, and she sort of went with it and made her line sound a little more glassy, a little more dreamy, and that worked out pretty well. I mean, in essence, the finger tremolo is nice, and the alternation between eighth note and 16th note tremolos, that was very, very cool. And then ending with a very almost a very rock and roll type of syncopation at the end. That was really nice. The only comment that I would make about this is that I feel you missed a chance here to explore what some of the other instruments might have done. Like, this section could have been longer, right? Because, like, as it is right now, it's like, I guess, 14 to, it's kind of confusing because there are missing, I see, so you're going with, you're marking the every 10th bar rather than having them right at the left hand, like all of your bar numbers at the right of the left hand side, which is actually I feel is preferable. Is to just it's just to tell us what the numeration is on the left side, and then that's just different styles, but it just really is easier on me. Just immediately look at that, look where that is, and see what it is. But yeah, but anyway, so you've got you've got a couple dozen bars here, and it's pretty much the same strategy all the way through till you get to here, and that's cool because you really did explore it. But wouldn't it have been interesting to have like maybe the viola take over at the end, or maybe see if you can get a conversation going between the instruments, right? It really, by the way, really effective accompaniment. That really fulfills one of the parameters of the assignment. And we'll talk more about accompaniment when we get here. That's because that also fits. But yeah, this area here is perfectly negotiable for a viola solo, right? They can easily go up to that C sharp with no problem. Good chamber players. And you could have explored modulating in this section to make it more opportune for other voices to take over, right? And then come back out of it the same way, right? So anyways, just that was the only opportunity I thought that was really missed here, was that, the viola could have taken over the melody and then maybe the cello with the other instruments around it. And you could have kept the sense of continuity going because the accompaniment figuration is so strong that it really, if you toss it from instrument to instrument, it's going to feel like it's got very strong continuity, right? Almost as if there are 4 players, right? Who are, or maybe, even 6 players, some of whom are soloing and some of whom are, maybe 2 of whom are just continuing to hold down the accompaniment. Yeah. So and good use of very easily playable double stops. That was great. That was totally easy. They had no issues whatsoever. Okay, now this is just a basically a recap of the beginning, more or less, with just maybe slightly different dynamics. I guess the dynamics are just backwards. And yeah, I mean, it all worked pretty good. Would have been interesting to hear maybe just a slight variation on this, maybe some voice crossings, or some other tweaking, just for exploration's sake. But it still was very strong. And nice exchange of roles, like viola, then violin, then viola, and then both of them allying each other, right? So alliances. So that was done very well, and I really like this accompaniment going on here. Just like the sense of syncopation, 2 + 1, 2 + 1, and then 2. That was very, very neat, and it gave it really a nice pulse to it. Yeah. So yeah. And also, just one thing to mention is close and open voices. The closeness that you continue, you sort of come back to. And then, of course, the openness at being an octave apart in each part. And, in places like here and here, that is all gives the music a really wider sound. And then this ending was very fun. In fact, I thought this ending could have been something in its own right that could have been developed a little bit more. But it's a really great miniature. It sort of consolidates everything, and it's very satisfying. This is something that will stick in the audience's mind because you return to things in an intelligent way. So I really liked this piece. I thought it was extremely effective, Mike, and I'm really glad that you shared it with us. And it looks like Gordon helped you work on this too. And also my appreciation to him. He's been doing some work with other composers and sort of behind the scenes here on the Patreon channel. So anyways, great work, and let's go on to the next score. So this is another well-developed, great miniature idea. This time from Adam, who is one of my students, and just really, this isn't something that we worked on together, but he. I mean, I think I did give him feedback while he was developing some ideas, but I think this was just completely out of Adam's head, really. And I don't generally tend to help my students rewrite their pieces, so whatever happens is really is because of their ingenuity and their creativity. I really love the form of this. And I thought that it really, each part referenced other parts really well, and really made it a unified work, even though it was such a miniature, and even though there were like really big contrasts of tempo and mood. Okay, so the main thing is just looking at this piece and seeing what are the ways in which it follows the scoring assignment, and I felt that was pretty well done. Like, for instance, the whole concept of close and open voices. So, what could be closer than this with a melody kind of coming from inside? Excuse me. Coming from inside the accompaniment, and all of this fairly close voice accompaniment and melody. And then, of course, very widely spaced ideas here. So just really, and here as well, a sense that Adam is really listening to and following the different directions. So that was pretty terrific, actually. Now, the sense of voice crossing, that was really well done. Like, for instance, here you've got, the lowest possible perfect fifth that could be played on the viola, and then these little C thirds by the violin, and over the top of that, right, starting from an E, right, the cello is playing above. So this is a kind of an example of really squeezing down the upper players into a place where they can sort of play at their lowest, while the cellist can sort of soar into their tenor register. It just really was exactly done right. Now, something similar happens here, where you've got the cellist up there on their A, sort of playing this higher register kind of idea, tenor register idea for them, and while the accompaniment just sort of flows around it. We already talked here, speaking. This is sort of bridging to accompaniment styles. I really love this boom chuck kind of idea. That was really, really cool. And kind of continuing on here with these open fifths in both instruments, and really letting the viola soar. And I think I already remarked in the video how there was some really nice dovetailing going on, so that the parts really just seemed to just seamlessly pick up from each other. Just really well done, from this A to this viola E, and then F, and then really climbing up high here. You have to keep in mind, what is that note? That is an F, right? So when the melody falls down to this A here, it feels completely in line. It almost feels like the viola is turning into a cello, especially since the cello part here is rising up to this F here above the bass staff, and then the viola is taking over on that same note, right? This F here, right? So it just really feels like one solid, unified stint of accompaniment. I mean, if you look at this. It's like violas and cellos bridging over to violin on the viola part, bridging over to viola on the cello part, right? And just really nicely done. And it was really good that you reprised it here, because it's something that the ear wants to return to. I mean, you didn't do it exactly the same at all, and that was great. When you reprised different ideas and gestures, Adam, it was very strong that you didn't do it verbatim. Like, for instance, here, this was nice. You're coming from this low G sharp, and then instead of just hopping right up to like, C A in here, instead of just going straight to E, to E C, you had the parts naturally grow out of where they were heading to, right, with these G sharps, right? So they both are A, and then they go to a harmonized, they arpeggio up to a harmonized pattern, just like before. So that was nice. And then of course the viola changes, right? What is going to happen here? And I thought that was very strong too, in the way that it sort of grew out of the way the accompaniment turns into more of a chordal structure just before the change. Now, the drawbacks that we had with this piece are mainly the fact that there are so many tempo changes, and those were hard to sort. So I would say if people are scoring, reading type, really working on their readings, and they're going to be in a situation like this again, maybe hiring people to read their scores, or being involved in a symposium where there's really almost zero rehearsal time, then the more tempo changes you put into the piece, the more you are taking away from the ability of the players to work on the finer details, right? So if they're just constantly thinking about getting all the tempos right, all of the ritardandos, just all of the changes, and just really making sure that it's the right tempo and everything else, then it just really does take away from that. I mean, we sort of worked around it, and I've been investing into these reading sessions as well, just to really make sure that this first generation of Moooc training works out well, and there's a really good example all around. So there, it wasn't a huge issue really, but I mean, it was worth it because the piece was so individual and so unique. But it almost feels like, even though it's a very nicely crafted miniature, it feels almost like somebody wearing a suit that is slightly too small, that they just want, their body wants to burst out of the seams, out of the buttons of what they're wearing, right? So it's the same thing with this. There's like, way more ideas contained in it that really are comfortable in such a small package. Which can be a drawback in a lot of miniatures. Here, I don't think it is. I think it's fine, because it just really shows an enormous ingenuity and interest and overflowing ideas, and that's great. Okay, so this could really easily be expanded into something longer, more development, before you change moods and so on. But really, a fun piece, a very serious piece, I felt. And just a great, a great interpretation of the lesson that I assigned. So, a lot of this just goes without saying. Instrumental alliances are just so obvious, so nicely scored. Both in accompaniment and in the interpretation of the melody. That, and I really like this dovetailing idea, this sort of falling down dovetailing idea. And this marking is great because this keeps the bowing the same in both parts. See, here is where it's not unnecessary to mark a down bow. I mean, here, this might have just been a copy and paste thing, where just like setting up the down bow on the first one, once the player knows the pattern, they don't need to see the down bow continued on for the rest of the passage. But here, this marking is great because it's down, and then obviously this is going to go up. Now, marking an up here for the cellist means that the two bowings are going to be in sync all the way through, right? It's not going to be down, 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 which will actually have a tendency to mismatch the way that the dovetailing notes are being played, right? So here, everything is being matched in terms of the energy of the bow stroke. And that was just really great thinking there, Adam, because you could see right away that there might be a problem if you didn't mark it. So this is an example of really good, really good marking of bowing that by the composer. All right, so just really enjoyed this. All of these. I keep harping on how great all of these scores are, but just really everybody, for the first string ensemble piece, everybody went all out with their creativity and their craft and did a great job. So let's look at the next piece. Okay, so our last piece for this first batch of string trio readings is from Gretchen, and this was just really tons of fun. I mean, it was just really a very giving piece, a very light-hearted piece, and we did talk a lot about slurring and phrasing in the reading, so I'm not going to go over it too much, except for just to remind you to try to take the same basic approach all the way through so as not to confuse the players, right? We want to avoid hand racing, right? The bane of missing rehearsal time in that is just like, what does she want, in this particular thing, or what do you want if you're there at the rehearsal? All right, so for instance, here, we talked about this, the Patreon supporters who are taking this Moooc can go and look at the same playlist of evaluations and readings and check out what I'm talking about. But for instance, this should match this, right? And it's kind of obvious in some ways, but not in others, right? Um, One thing I sort of wondered about was whether or not some of these other groups of 16th notes were meant to be slurred. Just because it's, here it has a really nice flow, but here it's da 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 da, right? So, yeah, that's just a really minor thing. Um, And I really liked the way that the piece started in a very unexpected way. Thinking like, well, is this piece actually in a minor key? What am I, am I missing something? If you're starting with the C minor chord, but no, but it soon led us the direction that we wanted to go. That was a very eloquent way of starting, by the way, just kind of tricking our expectations. Now, you're hearing a lot of, my objections to mezzo anything as being a safe place. Okay. Now here, you could have started off piano, right? And then just had an inflection here, right? And you wouldn't have really needed mezzo forte either, So just like piano and tenuto would do the same thing as mezzo piano. So bum, 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 and then a little hairpin into this and coming out of it, da 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 da, right? And that way you can just have this whole cohesion of like thinking of this whole thing as a piano thing, right? Now here, you have forte on the violin part, and since the violinist is leading, right, everybody is just going to try to match what they do, right? So you don't want your other parts to get drowned out either. So I would say try to have a more unified approach to dynamics all the way through, right? So in general you do, but it's just better that way, right? And back to piano, right? It gives you more of a contrast with forte, right? Mezzo piano is the blah zone, right? Just try to avoid it as much as possible. Now, I know like this is you scored this piece quite a while back, and you have probably heard me talk about, this in other evaluations, so I won't go into it too much. But yeah, this could just easily be piano, that could be forte, right? Or mezzo forte, it's fine. But just not too much mezzo, right? And then P, I would say P here and then pianissimo here, and just continue on with P espressivo, right? So start here, P, and then maybe a hairpin, right? Bum bum, just a really to really have some expression marks in there, right? And and then here you can come in with P espressivo. Now this right here, what you should remember is that if you've got, your little E flat thirds here, right? I I sang an E flat there. It should have been C, C. So if you got this bum 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 bum, okay, so that's all good. So the note is harmonizing from below with respect to the violin. But look, right here you could have put in an E flat on the D string, right, very easily, right, and just continued on the idea of harmony here. Okay, all right. So I'm not going to harp on it too much, but those are just some things to watch out for that you could possibly improve. Now let's talk about how the piece worked with the scoring approaches. And I thought that was very well done. I mean, not only did you sort of, were you influenced by certain models from the assignments, the score reading assignments, but you also, came up with your own ideas and your own ways of problem solving. So obviously, giving the leading voice to the violin in this kind of period thing is great. But, in terms of just like trading off the duties of, who plays what, and I just thought that was just really well scored, especially right in here. And, definitely instrumental alliances are, they are everywhere. They really help build up the music, and it's pretty easy to see where those are. And also exploring different, in a basic way, different approaches to tone production. In here, it was basically pizzicato versus arco, and some staccato, some grace notes, and so on. This isn't really the kind of period, since you're doing kind of period scoring here, it isn't really the appropriate period for too much sul tosto, sul ponticello type stuff, or sul. You could have done some sul G or sul C type of scoring, but anyways, it doesn't. That might have been just too showy for the more kind of clear and elegant scoring that you were headed for in this particular scope. So yeah, intelligent accompaniment styles, they were everywhere. They're really nice. And I really like this this approach here, how this opened up into a more contrapuntal idea. It was very nice, very mature kind of scoring there. Now, voice crossings were great. This was just so cool. The way the cello just sort of suddenly spoke out here, and then the viola crossed the violin part too, don't mind if I do, And finally the violin comes in over the top, like, okay, you guys, all right, I'm going to go back to being a violin here. So that was nice. And there are other instances too of very intelligent and well done voice crossings. So yeah, I just really thought that this used a lot of what I assigned in just really great ways and very natural ways. So beautiful close scoring in places, here and there, and lovely open scoring, right? Just beautiful, like just there was just almost fearlessly done. And I just really appreciate that. It's just too bad we had to cut off here at 3 minutes. This is obviously not a miniature. This is like the exposition of a string trio that is, a fairly developed idea. So it would be interesting to see you clean it up and finish it up and maybe add an adagio movement and then a rondo at the end. Or you could just say, oh, this was a fun exercise that I did, and go on scoring something, in a more contemporary style, maybe something that is a crossover between the really just extraordinarily intuitive approach that you have with your own solo guitar compositions, and bridging over to more contemporary, contemporary classical type of approach, neoclassical or minimalist kind of scoring. It'd be just really interesting to see where you go. Just your voice is developing and your craft is developing so quickly, Gretchen, and I'm really happy to also count you as one of my students, and really glad that you were in this first generation of Moooc students. So that does it for this video, and there are 5 more scores for me to evaluate, so we will do that in a separate video coming up either later today or tomorrow.